All right, thanks a lot. Morning, everyone. So I swear Jason Street and I didn't like mind meld beforehand or anything, but we're talking about really similar themes, which I think is great. I think it shows kind of the state we're in as a security industry. So I want to keep this super interactive, so I'll be posing plenty of questions. Again, accidental mind meld here. And so for the sake of the recording and also for the sake of accessibility, I will try to repeat your questions that you have either at the end or during the presentation, and also your answers, because we don't have a mic for people to line up to. So just show of hands, who here is currently responsible for some form of security education for their employer? Okay, a fair bit of you, yeah. Who feels like they have adequate resources to deliver security education? Fewer hands. Cool. So for those of you who raised your hand for the first but not the second, what are some of your pain points? What are some of the resources you're lacking? Joe.
In previous positions, I didn't get a lot of corporate buy-in, I didn't get a lot of management buy-in, and resources were a little hard to come by.
So lack of buy-in from management, lack of buy-in from team maybe. Yeah.
We have a very formal process for new hires, but it's the ongoing education that we don't have a wrap around.
Yeah, you have formal process for new hires, but past that, no good roadmap. Anyone else? Yeah.
Just general lack of expertise. Basically, I don't know what I'm doing.
You don't know what you're doing as an educator or as a person, lack of expertise. Okay, well, we can work with that. Yeah, so there's a lot of roadblocks out there, a lot of things that seem kind of insurmountable. So current state, SANS does these reports every year on the state of security awareness and security education, and a lot of times they look at where the pain points are, and most frequently it's time. Time resources are seen as the biggest barrier to devote to security education, awareness, and outreach. Once you get past the new hire onboarding and the annual refreshers that are a compliance requirement for a lot of places, oftentimes places don't go into any more depth than just those two in the basics. And so even for those, training is usually really generic rather than any kind of contextual to employees' roles, particularly when the training is outsourced to some kind of canned, pre-made video or quiz or something like that. And it's really easy to get people in a room when you're a company of like 20 employees, but people run into problems of scale, and scaling a security education, security awareness programs often addressed via just over automation. Let's just not deliver live trainings anymore. Let's not talk to people. We'll just send them a video and they hit a checkbox that they watched it. And when you're thinking about going deeper than just the basics, when role-based training does exist, a really common split is just to group employees into a few groups like upper management, technical teams, and everyone else, or sometimes just technical teams and non-technical teams. And regardless of where these lines are drawn, each category usually receives training separately. So this can lead to further scaling challenges because you're having to develop different curricula for each team or each role, and that goes back to consuming more time and resources than maybe you have or you think you have. And also, important focus areas can be overlooked because we get these blinders on about what people's roles are and what their access is. And so maybe technical teams, especially engineering, might receive some kind of OWASP top 10 training, but nothing about just threat modeling or basic OPSEC or physical security, things that are still relevant to them, but maybe it's like, you're an engineer, you should learn what cross-site scripting is, and just ignore the fact that you don't have a privacy screen on your laptop when you're on the train. So how do we address some of these challenges? I think having a lack of resources can actually make people get really creative. And so we can be resourceful if we make security education a priority. And I think that starts with buy-in from our own team rather than like, I don't know, there's a bunch of things, but we have to make it a priority ourselves. So some ways to think about it are like start with high-risk roles if you can't get training to everyone, pull multiple groups together and find ways to deliver common themes while still making people think about their own roles. build off of concepts that you introduce in new hire onboarding and security refreshers rather than going entirely net new. Find ways to bake in interaction and collaboration, including for remote employees. Remote employees are most likely to be relegated to really canned automated trainings, and sometimes they're the people who need our engagement the most because we often have less visibility into what their attack surface looks like. So throughout this talk, I'm going to be referencing a lot of times the training that I built earlier this year for role-based security education, but I don't want this to be prescriptive. I don't want this to be like, these are the exact steps you must follow to do this, but rather want to use it as a way to illustrate concepts that you can take and run with to figure out what works best for your own organization. Also worth noting, this training kind of came out of the very challenges we're facing in security education. We identified a need for more depth in our employee security education, even as a security company, particularly among teams that were the highest impact targets, yet we were a SecOps team of 2 for a while, and we lacked the staff time to build like 10 disparate trainings for each department. And so it's like, how can we say what we need to say and get people engaged in a way that actually scales with the time that we have available? And now we do have a dedicated security education lead, Kimber, and she's done awesome things, so look for blog posts from her, but I'll let her tell those stories. And even though I talk about trainings, security education does not have to be limited to getting people in a room and talking at them. All right, so somebody asked a question in the keynote in the last talk, where do you start? I don't know where to start. So where do you start? Does anyone remember what Jason even said? He said newsletter. Why? Communication. So, okay, so communication is good. Why does that have to necessarily be a newsletter? Okay, black shirt.
So the other thing that he made a point of, that it was important to train them on something that affects them in their lives, as opposed to just work.
You said train them on something that affects them in their lives, not just work, because they will take personal and bring it into work with them. And I think that goes both ways too. They can take good work habits and take them home with them. So rather than starting with the tactical of where do you start, I think start with the end in mind. What problem are you trying to solve? So what problems are you trying to solve by building out your security education and security awareness program? Anyone? What do you want to achieve? Yeah.
Reduce account takeovers.
Reduce account takeovers. That's a good one. Yeah. Maintain continuity of business operations. Yeah, the security triad is not just about confidentiality, integrity, availability is a big piece of that. Yeah, plaid shirt in the back.
Teaching people to value security, making them see the intrinsic themselves.
Teaching people the intrinsic value of security. That's great. Blue shirt.
Yeah, in that case, we're trying to comply with our contractual obligation to our clients.
Yeah, comply with contractual obligations. And compliance is a piece of it. And compliance, as much as people like to rail against it, for some places, that's how you get buy-in for having any kind of security program is compliance. Yeah.
Protect your brand.
Protect your brand. Yeah, brand integrity is huge, especially if you do have really strong brand recognition and you want to make sure that you can actually continue to sell what you're selling. Yeah.
Protect your patients.
Protect your patients. Oh, you work in healthcare. Yeah, so a lot of really good things. So when you keep those strategic goals in mind when you are building any kind of security training. So one approach that we took, that I've taken before is if you can't get everyone, who are your biggest impact targets? Who are the teams that are highest risk? And I don't mean that in terms of like, who are the users who are most likely to click shit? Because sometimes it's your job to click shit, and we can't just deliver a canned message saying don't click shit. But who are the teams who, based on what they have access to, what their role gives them access to, who are the teams who are going to be the biggest impact targets and why? So who comes to mind? Who are your highest risk teams? Yeah.
Finance or operations?
Finance, operations, IT admins. Yeah, they have access to a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Customer service, somebody that faces external customers.
Customer service, yeah. Especially since a lot of times those support numbers are public, and so anyone can call and try to social engineer information out of a customer service rep. Yeah.
The executive team.
The executive team, they're very high profile. They are probably the most visible members of your company. And so it's easiest to like, yeah, pose as Doug Song in an email, in my case. Yeah, and you mentioned teams with a significant influence on availability, like ops and IT admins. Also teams with a significant impact on physical access, like receptionists, like facilities, like recruiters who are often letting candidates in. A lot of times when we let people in who don't work at our company, it's recruiters taking candidates around. So it's good to go through this mental exercise for assessing your own risk of figuring out who those teams are and how you can target your educational efforts accordingly. And this gives the security team more deliberate visibility into the rest of the organization, kind of gets us out of our own bubble. It requires us to go through the mental exercise of learning more about each team's attack surface. And this is just really good to do regardless of whether we ever get people in a room to train them. We go through the exercise of thinking, what are we trying to protect? What do we want them to be able to try and protect? In the case of my employer, one could argue that, like, as a security SaaS company, we're all the high-risk team, just like we're all the security team. But yeah, we can sort of target that. So again, start with the end in mind. So once you've identified who your audience is, how do you engage them? So Jason talked a lot also about building trust. So how do you approach building trust? Yeah. Be available. Absolutely. Yes. That's very important. Anyone else? Yeah. Be empathetic. Hey, shameless plug is Joe Parker, my teammate, and he's giving a talk tomorrow afternoon on empathy and vulnerability in SecOps. So even though I'm talking about security education and security awareness trainings and workshops and getting people in a room, I firmly believe that good security education, it could be the best it could be, but it can't exist in a void if you don't maintain good relationships with your coworkers the rest of the time. So really important to keep those going. But getting people in a room can be a good way to kick off those conversations. I'd also say lead with listening and coaching rather than just solely preaching. So rather than leading by telling attendees of a training why they're there, have them tell us why they think they're there. Why are you the high-risk team? What do you have that you are trying to protect or that's worth protecting that could do potential harm to the company if it were altered or accessed or deleted? Something like that. So this type of discussion gets people in that mindset, promotes a better understanding of the attack surface of other teams as well. When you have people all across an organization going through this exercise, we start to see outside of our own work and gives us a little more buy-in, gives participants a clearer sense of the big picture of what we're all collectively trying to protect. Because I think for all the time that people can spend thinking about protecting their own stuff, they're not really thinking about what they're doing with other people's stuff a lot of the times. Participants also know more about their respective roles than the security team presenters do. As much as we would like to believe we know what's best for all of you, we know what you do, we know exactly what accounting does, what legal does, what DevOps does. They're the experts in their jobs, we're the experts in ours. So we want people to talk. So when you get people talking about what they do and what they have access to, then we're listening and we're establishing a connection. And that can build up a trusting relationship. And trust leads to vulnerability, leads to trust, leads to more connection. And so you get people to actually open up. And it's really important that people can be open both in a workshop setting and then in the future if they accidentally make a mistake. And then they can reach out to us. So it also, like I said, gives us more visibility into what people's roles are, what they have access to, and takes the burden off of us having to do all of that legwork up front of understanding exactly where people are at and what they do. And also, it's important that we're not exempt from this. When I asked about high-risk teams, nobody said security. We're super high risk. I know when there's been an incident, I see vulnerability scan reports, like, we're not exempt from this ourselves. And so I think it's really important that we not take the approach that we are above all of the bad things that could happen to us. Chris Hadnagy, one of the social engineer village guys, wrote a blog post a couple of years ago about the time he got phished. And like, this is world-class social engineer. So important for us to show that we're not above all of this. We are not exempt. We are just as high impact of targets as anyone else. So once you've got this conversation going, then how do you get people into sort of an adversarial mindset? I don't always like the word adversarial, but sort of that think like a hacker. When we teach security awareness, we often encourage participants to think like an attacker and expect them to know what that means right away. And we rarely put them through the actual exercise of getting into an attacker mindset. People don't see themselves as an attacker. They don't see, I'm not a hacker, especially if they're not super techie. They're like, that's not me. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a bad person. I would never do anything to harm someone. So why is it important to sort of at least know that this mindset exists? Yeah.
It's hard to estimate risks and make good decisions about risk without having that sort of mindset perspective.
Yeah, it's good. Assessing risk is really hard. Everyone is bad at it, not just security. So it's important to like sort of get a good sense of what's out there. So I give participants a chance to threat model what they're trying to protect. You don't have to do this by themselves. I have done it by pairing people or grouping people with people from other teams and have them devise scenarios where they hack each other based on their own roles, like based on what somebody's role is and use their access against them. Like, a really good example that somebody came up with is like, target a recruiter at a recruiting event and start asking them probing questions about like, oh, who does this person report to? What kind of tools do you use and all of that, and then use that as a pivot point, things like that. So helps them see beyond the technical and into just the fact that anyone can do this to anyone. And again, get a better insight into teams' access and teams' roles. And people with only outsider knowledge of what somebody else does actually come up with really creative methods of attack. And again, it's interaction. Interaction is more effective than lecture for retention of new information. It's less that we have to talk at people too. So once you've done that, it's really important to also emphasize that attack scenarios that people come up with aren't always that far-fetched. Make sure that you are tying it back to the realistic, which could be anything. So I've had people share examples of what they come up with and then share a few examples that have actually happened to Duo. Let them know like this has happened before or similar things have happened before. Sometimes there are things you can't talk about or you have to remove certain information. That it is what it is, but people really like to hear juicy stories. And so it's good to get that into their perspective. Right, so people are good and scared now. Do you leave them good and scared? No, because then they're just gonna go home and curl up in the fetal position and cry. So getting people into this attacker mindset is only half of the puzzle. You have to tie it to action. So again, how do you bring it all together? Start with the end in mind. Again, what behaviors do you want to reinforce that will further your vision? So what do you want to try to reinforce to achieve some of those goals that you laid out when I asked what problem you're trying to solve? What do you want your users to do? What do you want them to take away? Yes? Not click on phishing links. What if they click on a phishing link?
Also not have them survive that.
Also have them survive that. Yeah.
If they click on a phishing link, don't make them feel like the biggest idiot ever. Have your empathy.
Yes, if they click on a phishing link, don't make them feel like the biggest idiot ever. When correctly crafted, anyone can fall for a phishing link. When we were doing security refreshers this summer, I mentioned that if somebody sent me like a fish that was for dresses with pockets, I would probably fall for it. It's all about targeting. I saw a couple hands. Yeah.
I shared a security incident that I caused as a way to kind of break the ice and let the company know that everyone makes mistakes. And the worst thing you can do is to just sit on it and not say anything about it.
I love that. So the comment was he shared a security incident that he had caused, and that it can happen to anyone. The only mistake is if you sit on it and don't ask for help and don't communicate. Thank you. Yeah, I was talking to a friend who works on the DevOps team a while back, and when I was still kind of new to incident response, and I was like, this is scary. How did you get over breaking a lot of things and causing outages? And he's like, I broke a lot of things and caused a lot of outages. So again, very good to be vulnerable with them. Anyone else, behaviors that you want to reinforce? Yeah.
You want the whole company to feel like they are part of the security team when they're involved, and not just like, oh, it's the security team's job, and they're going to take care of us. No, we're helping take care of the company too.
Absolutely, that collective vision toward a higher purpose. We want everyone to feel like they are the security team, that we are all in this together. That's really important, that collective sense of ownership, not it's somebody else's problem. Yeah, so regardless of the differences in teams' roles or their technical skill levels or their seniority levels and the information that they handle on a day-to-day basis, there can be a lot of common ground in some of these proactive and reactive security advice for people in any kind of risk profile of roles. Some common themes that I've done are OPSEC. That's one that a lot of people kind of, they think about in some contexts, but not in others, like not putting your social security number in a tweet or something like that, and they'll tweet pictures of their house keys. And again, not only with their own information, but with others' information as well. And I think having gone through the exercise of sort of collectively threat modeling, they're in a better mindset to be able to handle other people's information. So talking about OPSEC is wonderful. Show people privacy screens. Also just open lines of communication with the security team, beyond just reporting, consulting and partnering with us, and keeping those conversations going, especially if they have like some kind of new software they're going to implement or some kind of program they're going to roll out, how to consult with us, instead of just, you don't want the only interactions with your teammates to be, help, everything is on fire. How can we be proactive? So they'll hopefully be more receptive to that after we have led with listening and coaching rather than just lecturing. So, okay, what comes next? Awesome, wow. Sorry, I had to throw in a Hamilton. Where do we go from here? So this is not the end-all be-all of how to approach building out security education beyond the basics. But the challenges of scaling security education while adding depth and maintaining effectiveness are not intractable. We can use trainings like these as a jumping off point to identify additional education and awareness needs and opportunities for future partnerships. So it's really important to not only be getting metrics on security awareness and security education, but to start establishing feedback loops. I'm not a product manager, I don't play one on TV, but we can treat this sort of the same approach as we are building product for our teams, and we want to make sure that we're delivering effectively for the people who are our customers, which are our coworkers. And so create those feedback loops and actually iterate on them. Just yesterday, we ended up changing our language in one of our security trainings because of feedback that we were open to and got from a teammate about the way we had phrased something, potentially promoting bias. So make sure that you are measuring efficacy, not just compliance. Iterate. When you have to automate, think about the absolute baseline. You can build consistent, repeatable processes without necessarily taking out human interaction. You can say, this is our consistent process for setting up workshops, trainings, that kind of thing. So automate where it doesn't detract from effectiveness. And rather than trying to do that, look for opportunities to delegate or collaborate. You cannot be everywhere at once, people. You're in dire need of assistance. 2 Hamiltons. Even though you're the security department, I think a logical next step is look for who your security partners are and who your champions are across the organization and figure out where they can take ownership and run with things. We've had, and this is probably helped by the fact that we're a security product company, we have had engineering and product design teams meet in small groups and just do a security show and tell sessions talking about topics in the industry that they've researched. And security doesn't go to those. We don't really need to. We don't need to be everywhere at once because this is sort of like a self-running thing that they do. Or like marketing team can work on like, what are the cool like security propaganda posters that we can come up with ourselves without us having to be driving all of the efforts. So figure out how to make those a little more self-running. There's a lot of opportunities out there for collaboration. There are a lot of ways to get creative with whatever resources you need and deliver champagne security education on a limited budget. So we've got a little time left, so if y'all have any questions, I would love to take them. Yeah?
Yeah, so I have a question. So earlier, right at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned don't rely strictly on canned automated security presentations, and you were stressing the importance of still doing some live presentations, security presentations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a balancing act, right? So how do you, what is your thoughts on the importance of each and how they fit with you?
Yeah, so the question was, how do you balance when you want to prioritize live security trainings and workshops, but you may not, how do you balance that with like the canned pre-done ones? If you do have to, I would say at least if you can, find ways to make them contextual to your organization and your organization's culture. So even if you have to pre-record some kind of lecture or some kind of training, I would say it's probably going to resonate more with people if it's coming from someone you work for instead of like X random animated person just generically talking about phishing links. So find a way to make it at least reflect your organization's culture. We've had to do this with we ran our annual security refresher trainings in the summer, and so there were some people who were on vacation or on leave who we had to send a recording to. I would also stress that live does not have to mean in person. And it's getting more and more easy to either be a remote team or a distributed team, so use that to your advantage. You can have like, use your remote video conferencing tools to be able to connect with people all over the place. Yeah.
So how do you combat the fact that a lot of people view those like annual refresher trainings, compliance trainings as a complete waste of time?
Bribe them with free food.
Especially things like virtual training. They'll just click through the entire thing, you know, as fast as possible. If you do an in-person training, they'll bring their laptop and they'll pay attention to the movement as extent possible and walk out of it and forget or have not learned anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was, how do you actually engage people who maybe if you send a quiz, will just click through quickly, or if you have them in person, they'll bring their laptop and not pay attention. If you have the budget for free food, just bribe them with free food, but that gets them to show up, but doesn't necessarily get them to retain information. So again, I think draw it back to engagement where you can. We've started having no device policies for a lot of our big group meetings. Like if you're on call, of course you can be on your laptop, but generally speaking, be present. And I think we have to also, this is where it's important for management at all levels to be able to stress, this is you doing your job. We don't want you to have any reason to be tuned out from this. Because if you're gonna be sent to a lecture or a classroom or a training or anything, but you're still expected to be working, then you're sort of serving two different mistresses and that are kind of at odds with each other. So it's really important to get buy-in for the fact that this is part of your job. And I think managers can set expectations with their employees that we want you to go, we want you to participate. And so that's where it's really important to get top-down buy-in. And as far as engagement goes, sometimes you do have a pretty dead room, but any way you can build in interaction and ask questions and get people talking about themselves, get people to open up, I think that's going to have a good result. And sometimes it does depend on your organization's culture too. I feel really spoiled sometimes for the fact that I work for a security company, and so we've got that a bit of an easier selling point as to why it should be top of mind for a lot of people. But also just I think a really solid organizational culture of open communication and being kinder than necessary. Yeah.
I've got a combined question here. My organization is a lot like yours. You provide a product or service, technology or security oriented, and a lot of our education is also sales, right? Basically, here's some information that we hope is useful. We hope that it leads you to take this action. I wonder if some of your training, awareness, and education is focused internally and externally. Like you're trying to educate your customers as well as your internal employees because you want them to take, be aware and take action. Is that something that you think about, or is it kind of rigidly separated in your organization?
I think it's something that is going to become less separated now that we have a security education program and we can sort of unify our efforts a little bit. Since my job is entirely internal facing, my purview is kind of internal facing training, but we do have sales and customer success people and product people, and I know that they do go out and talk about that. I did one customer facing webinar last year on building a security education program, and so some people who mostly have internal facing roles do go external facing. But I think you bring up a really good point that when it's, I think a lot of sales tactics are about persuasion, persuading people to take action, and so I think that's something that can definitely be leveraged for security education stuff, both internally and externally. So thanks for bringing that up. Anyone else? And if not, I'll be at the conference all day today and tomorrow, so come flag me down or tweet me, and happy to continue the conversations. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you all for coming.